In this video, I'm going to show you how to make this quick and easy kids desk that features this drawer, an outlet plug for accessories, and a dry erase board top. This is another project that you can do in about 1 weekend with some basic skills, so stick around and check it out. So my wife homeschools all 3 of our kids, and the problem is we only have this one desk. And let me tell you, it gets real old doing their schoolwork at the dining room table. So my mission was to build 2 more desks for this room so each kid has their own space to do their schoolwork. Her requirements were pretty simple. She wanted something sturdy with a good size, something the kids can grow into, and it had to have this whiteboard on top so they could use the desk as a scratch pad. She also wanted a drawer to keep their supplies handy. Finally, I wanted to incorporate this power outlet so they can charge their electronics. And for those of you who want to play along at home, I've included a link for the plans in the description below. Let's get after it.
The first thing I did was break down all the parts and pieces, starting with the legs. To make sure I got the exact dimensions, I knocked off the rounded over edges and cut the legs exactly to size. When I was done, I had 4 perfectly square legs. After a quick dry assembly, I started drilling my pocket holes. I used pocket holes for this project because they're plenty strong enough and they're hidden away. You just want to make sure that you orient the holes on the inside of the desk. And I used glue for some added strength. I used the apron from the other side to make sure I got the spacing right for this one. And I used a cutoff from the 1x4s for the other side spacing. Then I flipped it over and attached the stretcher. This time I used a combination square to make sure I had the right spacing. And I clamped it into place just to make sure it didn't move while I was drilling in the screws. I used this scrap block of wood with some sandpaper on it to round over the edges just to make sure they weren't too sharp. Now you can stain this desk at any point throughout the project, but I did it at this point because it's just a lot easier disassembled like this. And I use a 3-part staining process. The first is to use mineral spirits to clean up all the pieces, then a pre-stain, and then the stain itself. Once the stain was dry, I attached the back apron and stretcher. Then I put a coat of polyacrylic over all the stain pieces. Then it was time to get working on the top. I cut out a piece of plywood the size I needed for the top, minus the thickness of the trim. And then I used a liberal amount of glue to make sure that it was completely covered before I put the whiteboard top on. And for the whiteboard, you won't need to line it up or anything because you're going to trim the sides off. I put some foam boards on top of the whiteboard just so the weights wouldn't scratch it up. And you want to make sure that you put even pressure all the way across the top. Once the glue was dry, I removed the weights and took it back over to my workbench. To minimize tear out when I trim this up, I covered the top in blue painter's tape. Now hindsight 2020, I should have just gotten my track saw out and trimmed this up flush, but I tried to get rid of all of the squeeze out I could to use a trim router. It worked fine, but my track saw would have been a lot faster and a lot more efficient. Then I used my router with a flush trim bit and went all the way around the sides. Once that was done, I took it back over to the frame to see how it fit. And now it's time to start working on the trim that will go around the whiteboard and hide the plywood. And for this, I just cut off some thin strips from the 1x4 material I had left over, which I'll stain later. Once they were all sanded and cut to the right size, I used some glue and 18-inch brad nails to attach them. Then I attached the frame to the top with more pocket holes. and then I taped off and stained the trim. I wanted to attach the top before I stained it so that I wouldn't have to lay it down on the bench, and then I could stain all sides. Once the stain was dry, it was time to build the drawers. Anytime I'm building drawers for a project, I make sure to measure them to fit, even if I'm using plans, just so I make sure that they're the exact right size. Since this project is just for a kid's desk, I went to the home center and got some cheapo drawer slides. And it's always a good idea to do a dry assembly just to make sure that you got all your measurements right. Or at least that's what I have to do. Now the joinery for this drawer is nothing fancy. I just use butt joints and screws. But you want to make sure that you pre-drill and countersink your screws so you don't split your wood. Now there's a couple ways you could do the drawer bottom. Again, this doesn't have to be super strong. The kids aren't putting a ton of weight in this drawer, so you could actually just glue and brad nail the bottom onto the bottom of the drawer. But for this project, I opted to do a dado in the side and then just slide it in. And since I can't use a dado blade on this table saw, I had to use my normal blade and keep scooting the fence over until I got that perfect fit. And again, because these are little hands touching this drawer, I wanted to make sure and round over any of the parts that would be kind of sharp. This time I used a round over bit in my trim router. Then I installed the drawer slides onto the drawer. For the outside of the drawer slides, I used a combination square to make sure that I marked both sides at the same spot. Now for the drawer front, I made sure that it was centered, and then there's just enough lip on the bottom of the drawer that I could pull it out just slightly, clamp it into place, and then screw it in from behind. And since I forgot to stain the drawer front, I had to take it back off, stain it, and then put it back on. Once that was dry, I took it for a test drive. Then it was time for the power outlet. Now, since it has a lip all the way around the sides, you don't have to cut a perfect hole for this. So I just drilled a hole and cut it out with a jigsaw. It was still a pretty nice tight fit though.
Don't even need screws.
Then I pre-drilled and installed the screws. And that was the final touch. Then it was time for the big reveal.
All right, y'all can come in here now.
Whoa! No way. No way. We can charge our walkie-talkies. Hey, we can charge our iPads too.
Yeah.
Is this a dry whiteboard?
Mm-hmm.
Ooh.
All right, what do y'all think?
I love it.
All right.
I love it. Thank you, Daddy. Thank you, Daddy.
You're welcome. Now, I don't know about you, but that makes it all worth it. And Mama loves it too, so even better. Don't forget to pick up the plans for this project in the link below. And on your way out, go watch another one of my videos. That's it for this video. We'll see you next time.